Let's go through the stories inside. And Georgia Gilholy is a reporter and political commentator with Young Voices. Georgia, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Rosie. Good to be here.
The other story on the front page of the Times is the ongoing debate and discussion around what should happen to Shamima Begum. And the headline here is, Begum should be allowed to come home, says a terror watchdog. What's their argument?
So the idea here is that, of course, we know Shamima Begum is very young. She was 15 when she fled to Islamic State. The problem is that she's already lost her legal challenge. The British legal system has decided that she does not have the right to come home. I think this debate is honestly one that is going to go on for years. I mean, there's sort of the moral question of whether she had responsibility for what she did. Of course, she was at the age of criminal responsibility when she did leave. And some of her comments since she has sort of tried to renege on what happened have been very questionable. She sort of suggested she was sympathetic with, for example, the Manchester terror attack. And I think people question sort of her level of remorse. On the other hand, I think some people, believe she should be able to be forgiven. And then there are people who think, okay, let's not sort of go overboard and totally forgive her, but she really should be brought back to the country where she's from, she's raised, and she was, of course, a British citizen until the Home Office stripped her of her citizenship. Because, for example, the US has decided to bring many US citizens that did flee to ISIS, etc., back to the US to be tried for their crimes. And people are concerned that we're essentially just dumping a new generation of extremists in these countries where they went to participate in extremism and not dealing with them ourselves.
Yeah, George, I mean, the argument that's being made by Jonathan Hall at KC, he's the reviewer of terrorism legislation. He's going to say that British, or in this case, formerly British women should be allowed to return from Syria because that's the position that some of our key allies, and you mentioned this here, like the United States take, and we should be in line with them. Do you have sort of sympathy with her case, or do you think the right decision's been made?
I think in an ideal world, it would be responsible of us to bring her back to the UK and put her through the justice system and come to our conclusions there. I think members of the public are concerned that the justice system would not be rigorous or could be too soft. Who knows? Because at this point in time, that is not going to be an option, unfortunately. My concern about some of the watchdog's remarks are that the idea that, okay, women are less likely to have travelled to ISIS for the purpose of fighting. However, this doesn't really actually line up with the reason why many of these women did flee to ISIS. It's because they felt that they wished to sort of become brides to these ISIS fighters and help them build, a caliphate and give them children and support their activities, etc. Just because they weren't sort of looking to play frontline roles. I don't think it's very responsible to undermine that, because they were still sort of brainwashed with this very extremist mindset.
Let's look at another story in the politics sphere, if we can, Georgia. And Dominic Raab, as you heard earlier on the programme, he was speaking on Times Radio yesterday about what might happen with this Brexit deal. Today is a sort of, I guess it's a day of deliberation. One thing that doesn't appear to be up for question, though, is whether Dominic Raab should remain in position while this investigation goes on. He's made it very clear he is subject to an inquiry about his behaviour, allegations of bullying, all of which he denies. He said, though, I'll quit if any of those bullying allegations are upheld. He doesn't really have a choice. Surely that's what he's going to have to do if that is the case.
Well, we have seen many politicians scrape through when they have been found guilty of certain things. For example, let's say fixed penalty fines. However, I think that this is generally the sensible option for politicians, especially ministers, if they are found to have officially sort of misbehaved, because they know that whatever the nitty-gritty of what happened, they know that the public are not going to have a positive view of them if they try and sort of cling to that position where they're found to have done something that is sort of lacking in judgment. I think when you look at some of the accusations, they seem maybe a bit silly or frivolous. I think there's been accusations of him sort of flinging bits of pretzel sandwiches at people, and that's sort of become a meme on Twitter. And some of them do seem a bit subjective. People have complained that he sort of stares at them quite hard, maybe. People have alleged that he's responsible for microaggressions, which could mean a lot of different things. So I think if these accusations are coming from scores and scores of people, it could be that maybe his attitude is not conducive to a good work environment. But this is high pressure stuff. It's Whitehall. It's the centre of government. It's not going to be the most laid back and workplace. So I think that whatever happens, let's say he does resign, and let's say we see hopefully the report of what was said and what he was accused of. If some of it was frivolous, I think that the public may be willing to be more forgiving. And
the challenge, Georgia, is that some of the claims have not really been in a category that you would be able to say they're frivolous. If some people have said this made me feel physically unwell, I was shaking, some of the claims have been more serious than, and actually you might say, well, if someone threw some of their lunch at me, that some people might find that funny, some might find that quite insulting.
No,
or intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like I'm saying, with these accusations, there's so many of them that they've built up. It's not just one thing. And I think that it does seem that possibly he's someone who is not sort of the most positive person to be working with, especially if he's your boss. And I think that it could be quite intimidating if you're the only person to make an accusation. But there are more and more people coming forward with it.
And the question is how much it's distracting from what Rishi Sunak's trying to achieve, and also, protecting the people who are working in the civil service or for any of these cabinet ministers. There's been a significant legal change. It's in the papers today about the age at which you can get married. The legal age now, even if you had parental supervision or approval in England and Wales, now changes to age 18. And lots of campaigning groups are sort of heralding this as a real success in terms of protection for people ending up in forced marriages. What do you make of it?
Absolutely. I think it is a step in the correct direction. The problem I have is that many of the people this is purporting to protect may not necessarily benefit immediately. So, for example, people who might be married in a certain strict religion, let's say Orthodox Judaism or strict Islam. Often these marriages that take place between very young people, sometimes it's people who are actually even under 16, which is already illegal. It happens with under a religious minister, and it's not necessarily that this is something that is officially registered with the government, so it can sort of go very much under the radar, especially if it's a very isolated community. So my concern is that it might not necessarily actually help the people it's supposed to help, though I think people who are 16 and sort of maybe in a healthier situation and can get married previously with their parents' approval, I'm not necessarily sure that's would be illegal. Whether it's wise is obviously a different question, because I think if most of us look back to when we were 16, we probably think, okay, maybe our romantic choices then weren't most sensible.
Yes, it's less about protecting ourselves from our own mistakes, isn't it? It's about protecting people who are particularly vulnerable into a forced marriage. So today, the legal age for marriage and civil partnerships in England and Wales rises to 18, and it's all about trying to tackle forced marriages of children. In the Daily Telegraph, there's a story. I think every day Roald Dahl has made the papers ever since this story came out from Puffin, the publisher. But the Daily Telegraph have unrooted an old interview that Roald Dahl did, saying, I'll send my enormous crocodile to eat you if you edit my work. These are the words of Roald Dahl in an interview that he did several years ago. He threatened to never write another word if his publishers ever altered his words. What do you think about this? We finally hear from the author himself, even though the interview was done years ago, about what it would be like if someone said, I'm going to tweak that a little bit.
It's almost as if he had access to, a time-traveling device. It's pretty amusing. I'm just wondering what the publisher's response will be to this. I'm assuming an enormous crocodile is not about to turn up on their doorstep, but who knows?
Yes. On Friday, we know that Puffin made an announcement that they're going to reissue his books uncensored. But these comments, they were made 40 years ago in a recorded conversation with Francis Bacon, the painter, in which he sort of anticipated, I guess, the impact that political correctness might have on his work. And he told Bacon, "I've warned my publishers, if they later on so much as change a single comma in one of my books, they will never see another word from me. Never, ever." He would be a tough person to negotiate with, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. I think if anyone knows anything about Roald Dahl's personality, I think he maybe was quite a prickly, quite sort of independent person, and he certainly was not politically correct. I think one memory that sticks out about him that I've read is apparently that when he was in hospital for lung cancer, he sort of ran to the kitchen and lit up a cigarette on one of the gas stoves. So certainly an interesting character, and I think that someone that his publishers, if he was still alive today, probably wouldn't be as combative with.
Georgia, thank you very much for your analysis of the stories inside the papers this morning. Reporter there and commentator for Young Voices UK.